Hello, 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 and welcome. I'm Miran Khalili. We are DiEM25, a radical political movement for Europe, and this is another live discussion with our coordinating team featuring subversive ideas you won't hear anywhere else. And today we'll be asking, is it ever okay for power to attack the civil liberties of its political opponents? Like taking away their freedom of speech, their right to participate in political or economic life, their right to a fair trial, that sort of thing. In recent years, we've seen a marked increase in such attacks in the name of political disagreement towards people from across the ideological spectrum. Jeremy Corbyn, once leader of the Labour Party in the UK, was a victim of a frivolous lawsuit to stop him from participating in public life. Nigel Farage, the right-wing politician, had his bank account closed because of his controversial values, according to the bank's own internal investigation. And across both sides of the Atlantic, prominent activists, influencers, and journalists have been deplatformed, ostensibly as a consequence of their political views. So what's going on here? Is curtailing civil liberties just the latest tactic of an increasingly authoritarian establishment to silence dissent? What is it about today's discourse that makes this kind of cancelling so effective? Could it ever be justified when the individuals involved hold polarizing views? And as anti-establishment activists ourselves, how can we push back against this dangerous trend? Our panel will be examining this issue today, and you out there, if you've got thoughts, rants, comments, questions, ideas, things that pop into your head, then just put them in the YouTube chat and we'll put them to our panel. Let's kick it off with Julia Moore from the UK. Julia, the floor is yours.
Hi, Miran. Hi, Miran. Hi, everybody. Thank you. Are the acoustics okay? Everybody can hear me? Yep. Thank you. Thanks for that introduction, Miran. Thank you. You made, in your statement just now, you made some good references to some of the UK linked examples, Farage and Corbyn being on the receiving end of their lives being impinged on in the name of civil liberties, and they're very good examples. Now, on the basis that we are a transnational organisation, we shouldn't specifically look at country examples as typical, but the UK actually can shine a light on this particular topic, as historically, maybe mistakenly now, as history starts to look at issues such as decolonialization, but historically being looked at as one of the countries in the world that honoured fair play and at least presented an outward face at treating people fairly, etc., etc. Maybe scales falling from eyes historically now, but nevertheless, with that influencing the legal and the policy system here, it is interesting that the UK now is falling into the trap of an authoritarian backlash and starting to nibble away at those areas of civil liberties. And for those who are interested, if you have a look on any sort of past news item this week, there's been a very effective protest. In fact, Jeremy Corbyn's Justice and Peace Project have been promoting it. Very interesting campaign to remind jurors who sit on our criminal trials. For those people not aware of the English legal system, we have a criminal legal system where members of the public sit in a group of 12 in judgment of their defendant. And it is beginning to be a worrying trend that judges are directing juries too much. This has always been a part of a concern in the legal system. It's nothing new in terms of its existence, but of course where it starts to impinge on civil liberties with the aspect of sending people to prison, of course it does come into direct focus as a civil liberties issue. And members of the public from various campaigning groups have been part of a very effective street protest, effectively, in bringing this issue to the purview of effectively a UK watching public, and it has been actually quite effective. It's rippled some political feathers, and that's good, because now it will be acknowledged and now it will be scrutinised. So that's an issue that's actually happening at the moment, and anybody from any country can click onto a BBC news item maybe, or another news item, and maybe have a look at more in depth at that issue, because that will then link it specifically to what we were doing tonight. So the issue for DiEM25, as we should always do with these topics, is to say, well, what should the DiEM25 position should be on civil liberties and on attack of civil liberties? Because we're certainly under attack. Into the issue of civil liberties is certainly under attack. It's on the spotlight every day with the current Home Secretary in respect to many issues. And so the issues we should be looking at is, who are the key actors? Who are the people who are taking the decision, for example, to close Farage's bank account, to enact the austerity against Corbyn? Where are the gatekeepers? And effectively, where there is an issue of civil liberties, one has to say, as with any issues of constitution, would you like the current government to be the gatekeepers on deciding whether or not this issue is something that the general public should have free rein on or be curtailed? And of course, as we're looking at our constitutions at the moment, we're saying we probably wouldn't want this series of institutions very longer into the future to be the ones that rewrite a constitution, let alone be the ones who sit in judgment of civil liberties. So it may be feeding into more progressive issues along the line of participatory democracy, participatory deliberative democracy, where we take more control in groups of citizens to inform policy and policy making. So civil liberties itself is a global issue. It's a very wide issue, but broken down to its component parts. DiEM25's processes now can pluck this as a specific issue and say it is one of those things that feeds into the democratic process that we are looking to change and looking to campaign on. So I hope that gives you a broad brush, Miran. It may have been a bit too broad brush, but the UK is in the spotlight at the moment on this issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. No, that's very good to describe, you know, what DiEM25 is doing on that issue. I want to ask, though, I mean, the intro, I said that this is I asked the question, is this like a new kind of go-to tactic of the establishment to silence political dissent? Would you agree with that characterization based on some of the cases that we've talked about here, or would you say that's, you know, there are issues where things can fall the other way, and actually no, it's not the case? I mean, how would you characterize it?
When there's a yes, I'm sorry to be on the fence here, there's a yes and no for this. Nothing is new, as we know, and if we were doing this live stream bizarrely 50 years, 100 years ago in a virtual weird digital world, it would be the curtailment of liberties of suffragettes, for example. You know, nothing is new. And who takes those decisions? So obviously it's the power of that moment who are sitting as judge, jury, and executioner. And therefore, that is not a balanced, fair system, because you can't have a balanced view of a decision when the same people who have the power will be the same people who make the decision. And spin forward 100 years, and DiEM25 and the progressive movement are saying transparency, accountability, a break on establishment is what it's all about, whether it's climate change or whether or not it's civil liberties. Climate change is a mindset change to save natural resources and the very planet itself, and civil liberties is a mindset that says we have to protect human beings, and we have to give human beings the security of protection from those who rule in their name, but then who go horribly off message. And we can end that discussion at Trump and Johnson.
Thanks for that, Julia. And I should say, although in the intro I talked about, let's say, leading anti-establishment voices or influential anti-establishment voices being debanked or deplatformed, it has happened to regular activists. Last year, at the beginning of last year, there was the so-called Freedom Convoy in Canada against COVID-19 vaccine mandates and restrictions. And the Canadian authorities froze hundreds of bank accounts of those protesters, setting a very dangerous precedent, freezing the accounts not only of the protesters, but of people who had donated to the cause via, I forget which funding website it was. So, you know, this can happen at all ends of the spectrum and at all levels of anti-establishment participation. Okay, Amir Kiai, our policy coordinator based in The Hague. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mehran, and greetings, everybody. I wanted to just maybe take this topic and extend it to the general public, and particularly people who are, let's say, in low-income neighborhoods or are having a difficult time at the moment in general. And I'm sort of talking about the Netherlands as a case study, but this is a trend that we've picked up. We've talked about it briefly in previous discussions. And that's the loss of civil liberties, you know, due to public mismanagement. And here, of course, in the Netherlands, we know about the use of algorithms at municipal and national levels to ostensibly predict fraud, or even, you know, to predict violent crime. People might remember the movie Minority Report. So we actually have this, or just recently, it was recently officially stopped, quote unquote, but it was an 8-year program that was designed to identify people who will, in all likelihood, commit violent fraud. And it does that because it classifies people according to their background. So if you're from the Caribbean, Moroccan, or Somali ancestry, you are automatically, according to the system, of course, then we know this is racism, more likely to be violent. But of course, we see the other kinds of violence that the Netherlands has put on over its centuries on its colonies, or what happened in Indonesia, you know, in the 60s and 70s, and that's of course not the case, right? So there's always this discrepancy about perpetuating certain groups of people as more violent and others as not. And maybe moving out of the police aspect and more to the municipal aspect, what are the overall, apparently, from what activists have been able to find out, there's 315 risk factors that can put somebody on their additional investigation. So this is if you are a single mother, for example, if you are well-groomed, but you speak poor Dutch, if you have a foreign surname, if you have problems finding work, if you're depressed, if you are not using the average amount of water in your house or apartment, how outgoing you are, if you are divorced, your fraud risk goes up, etc., etc. So you can imagine that all these different 315 factors, you know, it can of course be very different for everybody, but somehow the algorithm has decides that if you are at fraud risk, and when you are under investigation, and there's a lot of cases about this, and people can of course read about examples online, but it takes years for a person to clear their name. They often they get their benefits cut, they have problems with various kinds of government bodies, etc., and so on. And it oftentimes, you know, leads to broken homes, broken families. The Toeslag affair, for example, resulted in over 1,000 children being moved out of their homes wrongfully, and those children are still out there in foster care. So this is a real problem, and it does affect people's civil liberties. And most of the time, it's just being used in low-income neighborhoods to further perpetuate the class war that we're all aware of.
Thank you, Amir. What a shocking intervention that was, but very important, and glad you made it. Ivana Nenadovic from Serbia.
Thanks, Mehran. And yes, Amir said some very things here. While you also mentioned an example about the truck drivers from Canada, which is another real life, real people's example. It's not from the realm of politicians or celebrities, so it seems very far away for an average person. It can happen, for the political opponents. It already sounds very high level and not like it can happen to everyday person, and it can. I wanted to point out that two maybe more of pop culture examples of cancel culture and how you can get deplatformed. And I think it's a very dangerous trend of cancel culture and trial by the public, not so much by the media. The media launches the initial information, and then there is a mob almost psychology going on in social media, and that's how trials that should take place at courts are taking place in the public sphere. I must admit that it was one of my guilty pleasures. I was following the trial of Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. That was another example of, taking sides immediately because something is right and something is wrong, and you should believe a victim and so on and so on. So to cut a very long story short, but my belief is it was a spin from what was more important and going on at that point. And I think it was one of the first reality shows trials that took place on YouTube and other platforms more than in a courtroom. So bottom line, my conclusion about who is right and who is wrong is that these two people are highly dysfunctional and were in a toxic relationship. So it was mutually abusive, full stop. So, judging too soon and jumping into conclusions just based on something that is a prejudice or something that is a trend also can be and is very dangerous, because anybody who was in any way in press knows that there is no dementi. So when something goes in ether, you can deny it as much as you want, but the information is out there and you cannot take it back. And the character assassination is real. And now we are also witnessing that demonetization, deplatforming, etc., is happening. And we might like it when a character that we don't like, such as Trump, gets canceled from X Twitter, but then we should think that that can happen to characters that we like and ourselves as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivana. And continuing your theme of celebrities who have been rather unfairly targeted, we'll note that the actor Kevin Spacey has been cleared of all charges of sexual assault earlier this year. After having his career completely ruined. But just to focus on what you said there a little bit about how once that message is out there in the ether, there's no coming back. And looking at how it can be used to silence political dissent, do you think there's anything about the nature of our discourse today, our very online discourse, that makes this a go-to weapon for establishment media, establishment organizations to target their critics? And if so, what is it?
I think it is, and I think it's a new weapon, very lethal one, and because it's easy, because it's the oldest script in the book, basically, and it's divide and conquer. You throw a bone, and people are, biting the bone, and that pun intended, because we are that poor. If we were not that poor to bite the bare bone, we wouldn't be doing that. So the system, the machine, has the majority of people right where it wants us.
Thank you, Ivana. Just two quick comments from the chat. One referring to Jonathan Haidt's work, the author of, what was it called again? The Coddling of the American Mind and other things, explaining that he has a model to explain why cancel culture is in overdrive and the tolerance for different viewpoints seems to be at a historic low. Yes, he's very good on that, and I appreciate his work. And another comment from, who was that? Gilgamesh, talking about how he says, oh, all unacceptable speech, in quotes, is now defined as, quote, far right, unquote, even when that accusation is ludicrous. That's a point of view. Okay. Up next, we have David Castro. I'm getting lost in all these names here. David Castro.
Thanks, Mehran.
Based in Brussels. Go for it. Sorry.
Can you hear me? Yeah, no problem. I mean, Ivana mentioned the deplatforming part, and I think that's an important aspect of this conversation. And I want to go a bit in that direction, but also talk about freedom of speech. There's somebody in DM who's like 95 years old now, if I'm not mistaken, or 94, one of the founders of our movement, Noam Chomsky. And there's something that he says in Manufacturing Consent, the book that he wrote, but also co-wrote, but also the documentary, where he says that if you're in favor of freedom of speech, then you're in favor of freedom of speech for precisely the views that you despise. Otherwise, you're not really in favor of freedom of speech. Let me give you an example from the country that I'm in right now, right? I'm in Portugal, where I'm from originally. And a couple of years ago, the far right was nowhere to be seen. Now, the far right is the third largest political force in the country. There was a presidential election, 2 years ago or something? They came third as well. This one guy managed to, cut across the political arena and get where he is right now. His name is André Ventura, of the party called Chega. And at the time when there were debates going on, the leftist parties were refusing to participate in the debates because they said that they did not want him to be part of those panels. And of course, that has completely backfired. The people that I speak to on the street are telling me, well, if the left just is acting like that and they refuse to counter ideas with ideas, then what's the point? We'll just support this guy because at least he's probably saying something that the establishment, as the people perceive, does not want to hear. And so his popularity has been increasing rapidly so, and it's quite dangerous if I must say so. The thing is that once the bastions of freedom and emancipation, the left has really succumbed, I would argue, to a new form of totalitarianism, one that puts equality over freedom. But we can't really conceive of a progressive society unless we place them on equal footing. The enormous failure since the onset of financialized capitalism has been to accept the former and neglect the latter. So we shouldn't be surprised, I think, by the far right's rise across Europe over the last decades. I mean, we've been governed by centrist and so-called left parties, which have been all too happy to manage the system, but instead of actually transforming it. And under a system that alienates individuals, like the one that we live in does, that negates possibilities for free exchange, it stifles public spaces, and in this political situation, things will only deteriorate. Now, if you move forward to 2023, not only have we lost democracy, as we argue in DM, to a system of oligarchy, but we're seeing human rights trampled on everywhere, outside our borders, within our borders, in our regions, towns, and cities. And yet the majority of us still refer to this system as democracy, even when the democracy in which we live has been kidnapped, amputated, sequestered, and so on. In this system, the power of the citizen in the political sphere has been literally constrained to removing a government that we don't like and replacing it with a government that we might come to like a little bit better. I mean, that's not obviously the analysis that I have. Of course, there are political parties that are really making a difference and trying to fight the good fight. But when you go out there on the streets and you talk to people about political systems and stuff, and their freedoms and how much they feel like they've been attacked by this system, that's how they perceive it. So I think we have a long fight ahead of our hands, both to defend equality for everybody, but also freedom, and to fight ideas with ideas, and let the better ones win.
Thanks, David. A question on your analysis, though. You refer to the left in general. Is that the whole of the left, or are you referring to a subset of the left? Because I might agree with what you say in terms of the, if you're looking at the left liberals, the very online cultural left, the more identity focused left, because you're quite right that there is this idea that certain thoughts, certain views are out of bounds. They're in the sphere of deviance and they must not be engaged with. And by extension, certain people holding those views must not be engaged with. But would you extend that to the whole of the left?
No, I wouldn't. And in fact, what I said was that the centrist and left, so-called left parties, so I'm already qualifying it by saying so-called, and the ones that have been governing, right? So they're not really leftist parties as far as I can tell. So in that context, I'm referring to those alone, the ones that have been in power, the ones that call themselves socialists, but they're only socialist in name. So that's the one. Those are the ones I'm referring to. Of course, it doesn't apply to every strand and every political party that classifies itself on the left spectrum. But many left parties have not been able to govern, including us, at least our political parties. So anyways, if you're out there, live in one of the countries where we have a political party, maybe consider giving us a vote next time around in 2024.
Or joining us.
Or join us. Yeah.
Not to plug too much, but the website is dm25.org/join if that's what you'd like to do, and you can become a member in a couple of minutes. Eric Edman, our political director based in Brussels, go for it.
Thanks, Meran. That was a great ad there, word from our sponsor. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. Something that we haven't been touching upon, and I think is equally important to who is being cancelled, is who is not being cancelled. So I was thinking of maybe taking that on. I was recently, and I make a point of this because it doesn't happen very often, I was recently exposed to a speech by Joe Biden. And honestly, the man is a ruin. And I don't say that lightly. He can barely articulate a sentence. He is incoherent. I think today it was revealed that he had a little walk-through card telling him, walk into the room, greet everyone, ask questions, walk out. And he was caught holding this to the media. He turned the paper around so the media could see it, right? Now, why am I bringing this up? This isn't Trump apologism at all. I'm just saying that when Trump was pulling his act, he was being torn 50 different ways, and rightly so. Let me just make that abundantly clear. Rightly so. Why is Joe Biden off the hook? The man is a disaster. He is dragging us blindfolded into a revamping of NATO, a one-way street to higher stakes, more intense conflicts around the world. He's barely articulate himself, suggesting that he is not even entirely in control of his own bodily functions, let alone running the state, the United States of America, the most powerful nation in the world. And yet the kind of public scrutiny, and not just public scrutiny, the kind of cancel culture, as we're calling it in this live stream, that was being used against Donald Trump, again, rightly so, is not being armed against Joe Biden. Why? So this partisanship of the media, this fact that they're very clearly taking sides, and the sides are not liberal or far right. It's not about politics. It's about the establishment. It's about the person who threatens the status quo and the one that doesn't. And the reason why Joe Biden is not being threatened, although he is a catastrophe as a politician, is because he doesn't threaten the US status quo. If anything, he is absolutely allowing it to function without any impediments. And that is fantastic. And that is why he's not under attack. This is why people are losing their trust in politics. It's not just the fact that they feel that media is partisan politically. It's the fact that its function is to make sure that nothing ever changes, something that our mainstream political parties are already doing, regardless of whether they are Republicans, Democrats, Social Democrats, Conservatives, whatever sort of division exists in our various countries. Everybody's job is really not to threaten the way the system functions. And then the media comes and perfectly fits into this. Now, unfortunately, and this is where things get complicated, I think, we, not we as in us in Diem, but us on the left, let's say, for example, sometimes unwittingly end up becoming accomplices to this cancel culture and this system. They kind of push our buttons, if you like, and we rise to the bait very often. So somebody, I think, can't believe we have Gilgamesh in the chat. What an honor. I think it was Gilgamesh who said that that everything that people don't like is being labeled as far right. I think that isn't accidental, even when the person that's being labeled far right is actually a leftist, because very often the left is its own worst enemy. And the people who will come after fellow leftists with the most vehemence and single-minded sort of frustration is fellow leftists. And there's no better way to trigger a leftist by calling somebody far right for them to latch on and attack that person. I'm not using any particular example for this. I'm not saying that this is the case for X, Y, or Z. I'm just saying that this is a strategy that more often than not works incredibly well. It's divide and conquer. And it's being used again and again and again, and we keep falling for it. That is not to say that some people who present themselves as left are not actually harboring right-wing sentiments. Far from it. We can all use our critical thinking to analyze who is what. But this way of like really very, in an oversimplified way, labeling people a certain way and then throwing them to the dogs is basically a strategy that has exactly the same aim as the mainstream media, which is to sustain the status quo, and anybody who feels like a sort of establishment threat being labeled as far right, because the far right are the main proponents right now of anti-establishment sentiment, unfortunately. And that is a huge failure of the left, one that we keep coming back to, I think, as Diem. So, and to wrap up, because I know I'm speaking for a while, there are some overall tendencies, I think, in our society that lead people to this kind of cancel culture. You know, we are very intolerant of people who we disagree with because we're not exposed to them. Media bubbles, social media bubbles. We have lost the kind of the thin skin necessary in order to live in a sort of multipolar society. So our usual instinct when confronted with somebody who doesn't agree with us is we can't even fathom it. We don't understand how anybody could possibly not agree with what we're saying when it's so obvious. And the same goes for the other side. They feel exactly the same way. And it's incredibly dangerous because when you don't understand why somebody's might be holding a certain view, your natural reaction is to delegitimize that view and say it's not legitimate to think that way. Therefore, you have no right to say this. And this is where cancel culture comes from, this idea that there are certain things that you simply are not allowed to say, but that doesn't stop people from thinking them. And this is where society ends up getting into a lot of trouble, and our ability to speak with each other and persuade anybody beyond our tiny little cliques comes into trouble in the 21st century. Because if we simply get rid of everybody who disagrees with us, that leaves us with a very, very small subsection of society, an impossibly small part of the bigger group that we're surrounded with, for us to ever be able to not only peacefully live together, but also for a democracy to function. Because a democracy requires for those separations to be flexible. The moment they are inflexible, democracy doesn't exist. It's not about persuasion anymore. You cannot persuade anyone, which is the whole point of a democracy, that people will be persuaded by points, but rather people simply need to trust the other side. And that is how you get people like Trump, who simply base what they say not so much on persuasion, but on trust, on creating this persona that you should trust, like a superhero persona, if you like. And that way lies basically the slow corrosion of the fundamental pillars of democracy. And cancel culture, unfortunately, is very much at the heart of this tendency, and therefore is very dangerous.
Thanks for that, Eric. Yeah, and maybe one issue that we could pick up on there is the issue of labeling things as a conspiracy theory, as a way of delegitimizing it. That doesn't mean that everything has to be, we have to believe everything and question everything ad infinitum. But I've seen this again and again and again. And whether it's about issues like the Russiagate, the Russiagate story, that Donald Trump was a Russian asset, or the lab leak theory, which suggests that COVID leaked from a lab, which is now considered a mainstream possibility for the origins of the pandemic, which disrupted all our lives, or maybe the Iraq War and the weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. Each time and again, there's no accountability, there's no acknowledgement even that they were wrong. And instead, there is this idea that, well, okay, here's this view you've got. That's a conspiracy theory because it's a view that I don't like. And that's very, very, very disturbing. And I think also, which is something that you alluded to, it demeans the people that do subscribe to it. And it makes them feel like, you know, ridiculous and spoken down to, and they will never, you've lost them after that. In the same way that Hillary Clinton, her campaign really suffered once she called some of Donald Trump's supporters deplorables. That was the beginning of the end of her campaign. Yes, it's a very elite approach, and I think it doesn't serve our democracy, never mind the left. Okay, Juliana Zita, based in Germany. Floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mahan. So I'm sorry, I'm a bit sick, so I hope my voice will go through it. So yeah, I have to rethink a bit because I wanted to say something else initially, but I will start with, I remember last year, or was it this year? I don't know, that, you know, Last Generation was under attack. They froze their bank accounts, they froze their webpage and so on. And the only thing that reversed that and had, you know, they had to apologize for it. The police had to apologize for that measure, was that there was some sort of accountability, that so many people publicly were outraged about it. And this is why they didn't go through with it. But I think it's a certain way of testing the boundaries of how far you can go and how far you can paralyze certain people in society. And if Last Generation is a pain in the ass, so to say, for the system, they will check the boundaries of how far society will let them go with, you know, oppressing them or freezing their accounts and so on. So I think it's super important that as common people, even though we tend to think that we have no power, that we when we stand against those injustices when they happen. Because now, really, since the internet and since Corona and since this mass opinion pool of what that exists out there, everyone can be under attack. It's just a question of which ideology is dominant in the culture that we live, and you can become an enemy overnight. And with all of that content that people share on the internet, it can be a photo of you on holiday. It can be you shaking somebody's hand whom you didn't know was a certain person that might break your neck someday. So, and the most dangerous thing, I believe, is that at some point, it won't be somebody who has something against you. It will be an automatic AI that searches for, you know, for a certain group of people and filters them out. And I mean, this sounds dystopian, but we're not far away from that point. That kind of people who think differently get filtered by an automatic system. I mean, you have all of these social points starting in China, where they test all those things. Nothing is said that cannot come worldwide. So I think there is a really big danger to lose social liberties. And I think all of these discussions, which include left and right and so on, are really a bit too confusing for me, because to be honest, yes, it has been said like the last years that the left has done a lot of cancel culture, but the right wing are doing it also. It's not like it's just the left people. It's not really a compliment to be woke. So if you get labeled as woke because you said something, because you said you're not against gay marriage, the right wingers want to cancel you out of their bubble as well. So I think we are at a point where you can cancel from all directions. And one last point, because I have a voice right now and it's functioning, is that when it comes to the media, I think we always forget that media, for them, it's a business model. It's like a lot of content creators out there who are also into conspiracy theory. They make money out of it. Sometimes they don't even have good content, but they have this, great titles where they, they say they do a big statement and then people will click on it and they make money out of it. The media has done this since its existence. I mean, we have in the 90s, the Michael Jackson trials, for example, to go a little bit back in pop culture. The media took that for what? Because they wanted the people to buy their newspapers, to watch their channels. So I don't think with the media you have to think too complex, because it's really how they make money. And nowadays also how people make money in the internet. So it's really very confusing, and we have to, if it's about politics and if it's about the political competitors, picking on each other, that's one thing. But when it comes to the common people, I think literally it can happen to anyone. And the danger is not just for ideological reasons, but it can be anything. It can be very trivial why you're under attack. At the end of the day, it can be because somebody wants to make money. So yeah, that's my point.
Thanks, Juliana. And a very good point that this also occurs on the right. I mean, now the US are literally banning books in classrooms because they don't adhere to their value system. Although I would say perhaps that this is kind of, without getting all kind of political theory, that this is kind of a center-right, center-left establishment phenomenon. And I would include in that left liberal people. When you have true anti-establishment views, there's no possibility for them to really outlaw topics and people and cast them into the sphere of deviance, because they don't have the power to do it. Then they don't have a monopoly on the discourse in the same way that the establishment does. No? No? Any comment on that, Juliana, or should I? Is your silence complicity?
No, I think, it's really, I think that there is a majority opinion, and you kind of have to entertain that. And this is what's happening at large scale, that to uphold the system, you have to kind of entertain the majority opinion. And whatever threatens that, you can, it doesn't matter if it's left or right, you want to silence that noise, kind of. So so this is, I think, why Biden doesn't get canceled, because he's not harmful. He's not that harmful to the system, but he's also not, not a threat for anyone. He's not a threat for anyone, like the way he is. He's really, to say, like a puppet. So, and also people from his party can take advantage of the situation. So, so this is why I think we are in this situation where, yeah, as you said it, to not repeat now.
Okay. Cool. Thank you, Juliana. Noma Thata, based in Germany. Floor is yours.
Thank you. It is a pity, really. It is a tragedy. On the African perspective, African countries, they look to the West for values, So when they see those values that emphasize, a freedom of speech, democracy, then they are questioning themselves seriously, because as we all know, African countries are autocratic, and this democracy is coming to them, is imposed upon them to adhere. So when they see the developed countries behaving the way they are doing, canceling people like Brand or Hera in the UK, we despair. But anyway, what I wanted to say is that this cancel culture in African societies is gender-based. A woman who is voiceful, is cancelled by men. He is made to be silent. It happens in many societies. That's why you find that women who would like to go to politics, they are fearful all the time, because the anger that can come from both men and women is so much to bear, And also the other countries that can be progressive, they fear of being labeled, puppets of the West, So they find themselves talking the language that is acceptable by African societies more than what is progressive in that particular culture. So, this is how I see it, on the African perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Noma. And yes, you mentioned the case of Russell Brand, which is a story which is quite fresh and is evolving fast. I would say that at least my personal view on that is that we should not rush to judgment, either to condemn Russell Brand as a sexual predator or to say that it's an orchestrated establishment hit job. And there's a piece on dm25.org that I wrote, if I can just plug that, on the front page, making that case. Daphne Del Cara, based in France. The floor is yours.
Hey, good that it kind of circled around to Russell. I was just going to say, not particularly about Brand, but I think there's something deeply pernicious also about limiting people's ability to earn money or get fired in terms of this. And I don't think anybody, of course, by all means, I don't think it will do any substantial damage to Russell Brand or any other celebrity who are, I imagine, very wealthy. But even if it's happening to celebrities, it's not only happening to celebrities, but also that message is very powerful, I think. In Turkish, we call it like disciplining people with bread. Like you punish people by prohibiting them from making a living or earning their living as they see fit. This is a way of discipline in a way, and it really, really worries me that anybody who would make any allusion to being on the left would be so easily okay with this. It's very and this is also like a story as old as time, right? You will lose everything if you're a dissident. That's the threat of power. Maybe if it wasn't for, I don't know, I'll be a bit caricatural here, but like if it wasn't for Friedrich Engels's money, it would probably be like Karl Hu, So it's very important that we never forget this long history of controlling narratives and limiting who can dissent and at what price, and the relationship to people's livelihoods or ability to make money and make a living in the way they see fit. So I think this is, I just want to add that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Definitely a couple of comments on the chat. Anton, I mean, this is in reference to Russell Brand. Anton says, personally, I find Brand repulsive and his politics horribly sloppy, but this attack is clearly about speech. Constance says, celebrities having it off with 16-year-olds is still pretty sleazy, laughing out loud. I think that the divide is very evident on our chat. Some other comments relating to other issues. Michael Kennedy says, unfortunately, you don't solve problems by agreeing with everyone. Good point. Dave notes that an illustrated version of Anne Frank's diary was removed from school libraries over a racy part of it here in Texas. This surprises absolutely nobody. And another person in the chat is asking about the Golden Dawn affair in Greece, Greece's neo-Nazi party that was once its, I think, third largest force in parliament. So I'd like to bring Eric Edman back in, who's half Greek and served also as Mayor of 25's spokesperson, our political party here in Greece, to tackle that, and maybe in the context of what we've been discussing here about far-right voices and demonizing. Go for it, Eric.
Thanks, Mehran. Yeah, no, I think this is an excellent case study to exhibit exactly what we're talking about. This is a topic that I experienced to the bone in the last 6 months, because I was dragged in front of numerous television cameras and asked to apologize for the fact that our party was defending people's right to run an election regardless of their political views. So this is the context for those of you that didn't follow the Golden Dawn case in Greece. Golden Dawn was named a illegal organization on the basis of them having orchestrated a number of illegal acts, including the murder of a rapper in Greece, Pavlos Fyssas, and they were condemned as an illegal organization. Of course, as an illegal organization, they had to disband, and they were not able to run in elections. That goes without saying. Now, what a court in Greece wanted to do, that was orchestrated by the governing New Democracy Party, the right-wing, most people by now would argue pretty far right-wing party in Greece that's currently in government, was to make it illegal for people to run in elections, regardless of whether they are members of Golden Dawn, but simply by association with Golden Dawn, especially people who are in prison for numerous cases and the rest of it. Now, already in Greece, there are laws prohibiting people from running in elections if they are condemned, if they are in prison. So this was a moot point. What this argument really was about by the governing party was to police political opinions. And of course, given the fact that they've been flirting with the far right for the past couple of weeks, this wasn't so much about condemning far right political views, but eventually setting up the ground to allow them to also condemn far left, what they consider to be far left views. So to prohibit people from running in elections for holding unacceptable views. In our opinion, as Mera 25, that is a one-way road to authoritarianism and the collapse of democracy. If you give the power to anybody to decide who is allowed to run in an election and who isn't, and who can say what, that is basically the last step towards an authoritarian state. And that was the kind of foundation that New Democracy was building. On top of this, our argument was that by turning these people into martyrs, by suppressing them and not allowing them to run, you are elevating their profile and you're making them even more popular than they were before you did this. This was something that we kept trying to argue, and we were vilified for it. We were called Nazi apologists. We were called, they said that we were trying to fish for votes from the far right, Mera. Right? Mera, the party that defends refugees and immigrants in the country, the party that is that has fought for the past 6 years on a daily basis against racism in the streets, that has been there in a number of court cases, organizing our membership to rally around these cases. But yet the media try to portray us as being basically friends to the far right for cynical vote hunting reasons. And this is my point from earlier, that they will label anybody far right simply to discredit them. And indeed, anybody who truly is far right should be discredited, I think, but on the basis of what they say and what they do, not on the basis of a label and a trial by media, sort of a fight of impressions, social media arguments, or the rest of it, which is more often than not won by the capitalists. And by that, I mean the people with capital, the people who have these means to rally to their cause, who can pump money into these propaganda campaigns and discredit anybody who they wish to discredit. This was a very hard fight for us to fight. Now, just to prove our point, they were not able to run, but because of the kind of publicity that these people got and the fact that they were portrayed as martyrs, a bit like Hitler after the failed putsch in Munich, who is in prison, the Golden Dawn, one of the Golden Dawn leaders, Kasidiaris, directed the former membership of Golden Dawn to vote for a new neo-fascist party. And that neo-fascist party came fourth in the election, out of nowhere. They didn't exist until 2 months before the election. Then the party was created, and within 2 months, they got almost 10% of the vote, proving exactly the point that when you try and suppress these thoughts and voices, you strengthen them, because you give them anti-establishment legitimacy. They say that if the establishment, the hated establishment, is against them, then they must be doing something right. And this is how you legitimize them in the eyes of the people who you're trying to discredit them, and which is why it's this kind of suppression, cancel culture, and the rest of it is so incredibly dangerous for our democracies, not just from a moral perspective, not just from a philosophical perspective, but practically. It is exactly the kind of rhetoric and the kind of action that creates the breeding ground that legitimizes fascists, as we saw in Greece, and delegitimizes those who try and fight them, in this case, Mera. And we were the only party that tried to fight this argument. And, you know, we were incredibly vilified for it. And again, sorry to end it on the same point as last time, but I find that very, very dangerous.
Thank you very much, Eric. And with that, I'm afraid we're going to have to close because it is the top of the hour. Let me just read 2 last comments from the chat, and thank you all of you for posting your questions and comments in the chat. The first, an individual's rights will be protected only so long as they don't conflict with the state. Nothing is so dangerous to a society. And Gilgamesh again says, we need the self-confidence to allow dangerous opinions. Otherwise, we'll face the greater danger of any opinion being arbitrarily silenced. Furthermore, we need constant practice in persuading people. Well said. So thank you to our panel. Thank you to you out there. If you'd like to join us, if you believe that the answer to bad ideas is to challenge them with good ideas, if you'd like to bring down the establishment, fight for regular people, or at least have a damn good time doing it, then there is one address that you can put into your browser, and in a couple of minutes, you'll be a member. That is dm25.org/join. Thank you again to our panel. Thank you again to you guys for watching and for your questions and comments. Join us at the same time, same place,